Hello, I am Radagast, and this is Mystic Brew the Tartary series. I've definitely taken some time off. I guess I'll just explain my absence a little bit. It's nothing dramatic. Certainly nothing bad happened to me. In fact, something really exhilarating personally happened to me, and it was an ongoing experience. It continues to be an ongoing experience, but I have a little bit of a break, and it just was difficult to stay out of trance state in sitting in a seclusion in my room. I mean, interacting with the people, I'm fine. But when I'm kind of sitting in a camera and I'm not interacting with another live person, I, 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 I've kind of found a certain frequency to be at that I get a lot of great. I'm getting a lot of great information, and it's been an absolutely delicious instructional period for me. But it hasn't been necessarily a so something to turn into a show necessarily. Personal, because a lot of it is Mystic Brew. Mystic Brew comes from the fact that I self-identify as a mystic. For decades, I've been a mystic, and mystic and shaman have a lot of similarity. But a shaman is kind of like a profession in more in like a traditional setting, where a Gnostic shaman is more of a mystic. It's about getting information that feeds your own gnosis, that allow you to be a better functioning human, and yeah. So anyway, so a lot of the information I'm getting, we're all interested in the Tartary and who are the Tartarians and the old tech and that culture, and but I'm also these investigations have awoken genetic memories I might have mentioned in previous videos. My mother told me we have Tatar blood, so there's like a genetic memory to pull out of, and that's one of the things about mystic states and kind of shamanic journeying, but more the mystic state, the trance state where you don't journey, but it's as if you are journeying through a library of sorts instead of worlds. But it's an oral library. Like in other words, it's like a narration with pictures. It's just an amazing experience. Very difficult to put into words, and I'm not even sure that a lot of the things that we do in our journeys or our trance states are much of it is for personal enrichment. It's not that one can't share. It's not a secret, but it's kind of private. And so, the transmission of what is private can get tricky. And then the other thing is dipping in the whole. I'm aware of the work of Michael Tessarian. I mean, Michael Tessarian is a very good researcher. Comes to a lot of conclusions I might not come to, but he's just such a any good researcher like Martin Liedtke. How much information he brings. His conclusions might be different than I might come to, but he just keeps on bringing the data and bringing the data with along with some good conclusions. His Phoenician and what we're calling the Tartarians, and that'll be part of this talk, is brilliant, and it's spot on also. And it also kind of follows a trajectory that if we, with let's call it the legends of Atlantis. Okay, we'll call them legends. We'll just place them kind of somewhere in there, and whatever they are, we don't need to be exact. But even those legends speak about two very capable cultures on the Isle of Atlantis, and one was very noble in what their sciences and what their mysticism and their sacred sciences revealed to them, and the enrichment of humanity from whatever is given to the few must be shared with the many. At least the attempt must be made. Sometimes you can't share. People don't want to share what we have, and that's all good too. And then there was another group that was very much into, I guess you could call them a more narcissistic group. And of course, when one is narcissistic, even when they engage in shamanic or even trance practices, it's a different experience. The whole purpose of knowledge gathering, in my opinion, is to gain wisdom. So when one has knowledge, the wise application of it is the way. It's like the Tao of things. If some are more comfortable with natural law, we'll use the word law. The word law for me is not a word it just has enormous toxic baggage with it. So I usually like to use the way, because the way is the way. The way is the way. So when it comes to the aria, Michael Tessarian, I mean, listening to some of his talks really inspired some genetic memory firings. And that goes back months, but just recently now that remembering my mother telling me we have Tatar blood, and then just using the capacities we all have, but some, it's just kind of like musical, talent. If you have musical talent when you first start, you're at one level, and then after some years, you are, more capable. And it's kind of similar with, journeying, trance work, inner work, things like that. And as a mystic for decades, it's something I've been doing for a long time. And although I've learned to trust it for myself personally, and the information I get, to put it in a public, like in a public platform, like a YouTube platform, and ask anybody to. I mean, I can ask people to listen, but again, then the whole thing is, at what point is it just narcissism talking about your own experiences? So kind of threading that needle, walking that line, has been a challenge for me, and also just staying in a kind of a conversant state without slipping off, because it's been so delicious. I mean, it hasn't been like, oh, I'm waiting for this to end. When it ends, I will kind of return to things I was doing before it began. And it kind of began just before the last full moon. And now a new moon has changed shifts, but that shift, that the new moon, the energy it went into, was part of kind of, it was almost as if like the weeks leading into the new moon were preparing me for what was coming for the new moon. So it's just begun. And so and the interesting thing is when I delve into memory of the aria, and that's when and we get the Aryans and Arya are connected, but the word Aryan has been tampered with seriously. It's a word I have some difficulty using because of what it means, as opposed to the Arya, which is a culture of wisdom and sciences. I mean, wisdom really is the sacred sciences. The science and the supernatural. All the science gets taught to us by all the inspiration we get from the supernatural, and then we make it work here. I mean, people like Tesla will tell you how most of the stuff. It's not like he invented it; he was kind of given it. And in certain cases of his electricity, might have been part of his, the what we'll for now call Tartarian culture memory, because they were definitely part. He was from that. He was from the Balkans. So when it comes, like I found, even when I do a weekly group that I've been doing for some years, Global Mission of Peace, and I remember I was sharing a little bit about the aria with them, and one of the problems when I go into it, it's almost like coming from memory. And I have to watch like pronouns because I want to say they, and sometimes I found myself slipping into we. We're one, so we is a self. The word I is buried in we. It's a group, but one is in there if they're using we. If one uses the pronoun we, and I found myself even when I was thinking about expressing them coming in we. The word we as a pronoun was, in other words, like I was part of the group. So that's kind of weird. I mean, not for me, but like, to share that, to put it out in public and say, oh, you have genetic memories of the art, So, I'm aware. I'm not, the trance state is not a state of insanity. It's a state of altered consciousness. My sanity is fully intact, including, the social and I'm even an ASPE, and, negotiating those social things can be a little bit tricky because it's a different appreciation of the reality that we're in. So that, but that's another story. So the Arya. I really would like to speak a little bit on the Arya, because to me that's when we're looking at this architecture, the architecture we're oohing and ahhing over, as I feel we rightly should, because of why it was even built that way. Besides the energy harvesting, I mean the aesthetics of it, the sacred geometry of it, the evocation of the natural world. Even when we had to leave the forest, how do we kind of still stay there? And tall, really big buildings like the huge oaks, and like in the Northwest, the redwoods, that have an organic architecture to them. It's feel like you feel like we're still in those marvelous cathedrals that we call the sacred groves. And there was a need. There was a need to come out of the forest as the species. This is part of our. This is part of the. Again, I'm a Gnostic, so this is part of the anthropos coming into their divinities. So, their chain within it, because everything is a fractal. So we're a fractal of divinity. And and at our fractal level gives the upper fractals a perspective that is quite useful. And when you tie into that line of experience, actually, it becomes really rich. It becomes meaningful. It gives the whole purpose of why am I here. It's like, oh yeah, beautiful. The natural world is incredibly beautiful and sensuous, and we weren't given five senses to dull them. Arya. So the Arya seem to have arisen as a culture, at least post-cataclysmically. Maybe it's a reassembling. I don't know whether it arose organically or was a reassembling, but we're talking about, from, let's say, call the word historically, timeline, it might be a better word, arose in the Caucasus area of Eurasia. Like Permian plateau of like northern Iran, and then going a little bit west, and like to the Caucasus Mountains. And I also find some information. Again, now I'm going to speak from mystical. Okay, so this is not research. This is me sharing what I want to share, and you can, if it sounds delusional, that's okay. But if I wasn't going to, either I share this or I don't make videos. Except musical ones. I got a new amp behind me, see that beautiful blue thing? Be doing some music things. But a lot of people who subscribe to me didn't subscribe for my music. I know they subscribe for the Tartary discussion, and I'm aware of that. Arya. So the Arya to me represent wisdom. The wisdom embodied in the human animal, or the human species, and basically getting that kind of consciousness into this smaller fractal, and then enjoying that kind of consciousness in a setting that consciousness gave itself to put itself into. All right. So in other words, the whole beautiful paradise of Earth and the consciousness of the gods within humanity is a setup for us to become that in that continuum, and then in our smaller form, we can actually immerse ourselves in what we as the creators created to immerse ourselves in. And the Arya knew this, because it's part of the human species doing the way, being in the proper path of the dreaming of the planetary animal mother. Again, I'm hitting you with a couple of Gnostic terms here, and again, you can disregard them. And I really sense that the proximity to the Caucasus Mountains, which was the last holdout of Neanderthal, And Neanderthal is, starting to come to light about what a certainly not an intellectual brute. Neanderthal was a brute the way a horse is a brute, or any natural animal that's not domesticated is a brute in just its vitality. It's brutish in that way. And it appears to be a human species that loved nature so much it did not wish, it actually consciously chose not to progress. It had already dream traveled into the ramifications of certain methods of leaving the forest, leaving nature, and the great provider, and going out and doing things that would make us have to provide for ourselves in a certain way, or be more creative in nature. And it seems that Neanderthal man just thought nature was just fine the way it was, and they were there to just enjoy the richness and beauty of the earth. And I think that might have even be why another, why Cro-Magnon had to show up, because the Earth Mother wanted a little more dynamism. But the gifts of the Neanderthal, the psychic gifts, the immersion into the dreaming of the Earth reality, was unsurpassed in a human animal. And I do believe that I think that in the Permian Plateau, which is a little more east of the Caucasus, there was, the shamans there were getting enormous amounts of useful wisdom, which was allowing them to develop sciences and language and architecture. And even civic functions, how to move out of the forest but still stay natural, and not to interrupt nature while experimenting with how we expand and do things a little bit differently than the rest of the animals do. Because they already the creators already have the input of the animals. They already have the sensory input of the natural world from that aspect. But for me, like anytime I smell a rose, I realize that part of my purpose as one of the divine outpourings is to not only enjoy the scent myself, but also remember that one of my purposes of my own sense of smell, is to enjoy the rose, so that the fractals above that don't have a nose on top of that rose can appreciate what was created from their aspect. I mean, it's very, like I said, these mystical stuff gets very rich, and I don't know that it translates well. Right now, I might be sounding like a nut job. I hope not. Aria. I have to constantly say that word. So it appears to me that, and that's the other thing why I don't like the word Aryan, because it limits the genetic expression. Now, the fact that it seems that the Arya arose in the Permian Plateau, or northern Iran, over as west, I think it's the Caucasus, would kind of posit some Caucasianness. But the culture itself was meant, although it arose within that, it's the whole idea is this is the human animal. So where it might arise in one place, but then the mission becomes to get it out. It's not about hoarding. It's almost like it's been like one part of the gene pool has activated in a certain way, and so now through teaching and even genetic sharing to wisely distribute that, because there's brilliance, real intelligence, great physical strength. I mean, there's great genetics everywhere, and the Arya knew that the future depended on good genetics as well. That's not as straightforward as it sounds. Good genetics are good genetics. and not a whole lot of that around these days. And so one of the issues I'm having with, I've been calling the Tartarians the old culture. I actually think that part of maybe we should lift the Arya out of Tartari, and just kind of refer to this the culture of the Arya, the wise ones, the nobles, the true nobles. So that's the other thing. What I'm getting is that the caste system that we now see in India is the corruption of the original social organization of the Arya. The social organization was actually a marvel of organization because it wasn't hard clad. The organization was based basically on what you did. Now, very often, if you were born in a family of farmers, you would stay farmers. Because that's a skill. That's an enormous skill set. I mean, it's and feeding. And once we left hunter gathering, the farmer becomes hugely important. And you're going to need a fair, you're going to need a fair amount of them. So the structure of the caste system was really just about organizing. I mean, if you have a bunch of farmers and they're just minding their own business, and then you have a merchant who's going to be helping them move that stuff, that person is going to be coordinating multiple peoples. So whenever one is coordinating more than others, it looks like hierarchy, but it's an organizational chart. The caste systems were not clad. In other words, if somebody in a farmer decided that they had great skill as a merchant, then they would be in the merchant class. The caste at that time, the original conception of the caste were nothing more than social organization. Basically a meritocracy. But again, it wasn't, nobody wanted to be what they, a good, balanced human will not want to be what they don't want to be. They want to be what they want to do, what gives them great passion. And again, without any narcissistic disorders, the passions are healthy. The original caste system, or again, once again, it was set up by the Arya. So again, but they were the ones who had kind of this culture that could be moved, and because it was conceptual in the way it organized. And it was kind of like a way of taking the organization of nature and finding something that would be unique to the kind of the human species, in amongst many other, at least mammalian species and millions of other kinds of species. And it seems that, again, echoing the kind of Atlantis legend, there was apparently there were narcissistic disorders and other kinds of disorders, and always have been. And it seemed that formed within the Arya a kind of a a group that kind of could have been there, but their lesser natures made them more narcissistic, seeking simple gratitudes rather than the rich gratitude of being a source of goodness. And generally, so the kind of things that often come with that will be, pursuit of the frivolous. So, when if you have two different groups from, in a similar situation, one group applied itself and wants to be wise, and the other group just wants to play a lot and pretend that they did do the work that the others did. And over time, that'll create two different groups that came out of the one. So they always kind of have a bond there. But they become distinct groups, and it really becomes that, like in a lot of unhealthy kind of familiar relationships, one part of the family does all the work, and the other side just wants the goods that come with that work. But since we're part of the family, and again, those kind of dynamics apparently did create a split. And I think that's what we're seeing in what Martin, a Flat Earth British, has identified as the Phoenicians chasing, quote unquote, the Tartarians, or in my case, the Arya. The Phoenicians chasing the Arya. Because they're almost good enough. But the other thing that reveals, like with the Arya, you see so much minimization, very light use of right angles. When the Phoenicians come in, you start seeing the cubes and the rectangles and the squares, because they are Elites. The Arya were pagans. And that's the other thing we got to remember. The Arya were pagans. And I don't mean Roman and Greeks, because the Roman and Greeks are state religions. They're not pagans. Those are city religions. Pagans are nature-based. Nature is where all the wisdom came from. Nature was the provider before we learned to provide for ourselves. And without nature, we wouldn't even be able to provide. All we've done is improvise on nature. Give us, I guess, a little more ability to travel about, rather than being locked into one environment, like all other animal species are. Again, the Tatars are a people, and it would look that the Arya arose again in like a Permian plateau, no further west than the Caucasus, and probably and it seemed a big hotbed of it being like where northern Iran is, the Permian Plateau. It's called. Good place for sky watching too. Which was that was the other thing. Astronomy, astrology, sky watching, which is astrology is kind of like something you do on paper, and it's set up where the ancient sky watching of the Magi was that the constellations were there. It was a living thing, not something on paper. And as the planets were moving, and they had, each one had its own, its own indicator is the word. There's another word for it. But it's because of what it indicates, but there's a word that could have preceded that. So, this culture, the Arya culture, arose in Tartary, what would be called Tartary. So to me, but there is, later on, much of the Tatars became Muslim, and the Arya were pagans. And I really do believe that part of the fall of the Arya was when, again, I'm going to work with Fomenko's thing, because to me it feels right. In 1150, what we call from our timing 1150 A.D., the Christ was born in somewhere, in Turkey, or Istanbul area, and they crucified him in 1186. So that would have been the birth of Christianity. And then Islam followed shortly thereafter. Don't forget, the original history is his Christianity, starts either, like let's say 300 AD, and then Islam, 635, somewhere around there AD. But when you kind of when you realize those dates, I think, are incorrect. Okay, I'm not going to say they're incorrect. They're not working for me. But the Fomenko dating, especially the compression, how much has happened, like how you go from a beautiful Aryan-led environment to this stuff. And when you realize how vicious they are, you realize that they couldn't have been on the loose for thousands of years. They would have wreaked much more havoc. I mean, these people are such wreckers that it makes a lot more sense they've only had a couple of 100 years to do what they've done. Because if they'd had more time, they would have done a lot more damage. So, you have Tartary and its Aryan culture, and then Christianity arises, and then Islam arises, and they're not pagans. So that's gonna put a little friction in there. So my story will be, and I could, it's open to correction. I'm not stuck on it. This is just kind of like what I'm getting. Is that Christianity began the first assault against the Arya. I mean, a soft assault, but it kind of started growing. As dogma grew, the assault grew. And then when Islam arose, and most of the Khans became Islamic, so that would have put them at odds with the pagan Aryans, or the pagan Arya. And so I think what happened was that initially the Abrahamic religions turned against the Arya and made them have to move all. They were probably moving all over the world, but certainly made them have to consider moving around and find other pagan cultures, like in South America. In the Aborigines, they had to go find other pagans to bring them wisdom because the new guys were not in the mood for wisdom. They were all about righteousness. And and then after they drove the Arya out, then they turned on each other. Because the mindset of that cosmology is quite confrontational. I mean, righteousness does not play well with others, very simply. Being correct plays well, but being righteous, that's a scary word. There's millions of dead bodies from righteousness. And North America, and the Americas are a very good example of what happens when righteousness visits a land. So the Arya, I feel the Arya had got dispersed once, because the whole world was pagan, and until I don't know 1,000 or over 2,000 years ago. Again, who knows the datings with the Old Testament and when again, it's for me the Old Testament is to the I guess the seed of Abraham, like what Homer was to the Greeks. It's their family traditions and mythology. The fact that it's been adopted by the world is insane to me. I totally respect that they want to keep their own book. Totally respect that. But for the rest of us, I mean, that seems insane. I mean, same thing with the Quran. I mean, they got a book, all right, fine, but, okay, good. How much land you need? The whole world is off limits. Excuse me. So yeah, I think that, I don't know, I might, I have a few pictures. I like this one here. I'm going to transition because one does not sell the land people walk on. Yeah, see, land ownership, that's relatively a new thing. Started with the kings. I mean, I don't even get me started on kings and emperors and stuff. Those are all signs. When you start seeing kings list and emperors list, the clowns have arrived. This one is very powerful. This is really, I mean, this man is saying something here. And the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. And he was measuring his words with this statement, no question about it. I'll just see what else I got. I was doing some work on some. I'm realizing hydraulics is a huge part of the of, I would say, Arya science, because nature was revealing her secrets to us, and the use of water was one of those secrets, as well as the atmosphere and the air. I mean, this nature will tell us how to do things. We're here to expand. We're here to be different than forest dwellers. And there's a sacred technology that will allow us to do that. And the Arya had that technology. What did I call this one? A pissing match. What I find funny here, once again, when you see these guys are, well, first of all, I don't know who they're standing on over here, but over here you can see there's one kind of architecture. I mean, this, you can see this is, to me, this looks more like the architecture of the Aria. And then you come over here, you know, and it's, you know, the big boys here now. You know, it's the boys club showed up. And I don't know, it looked like there's, it looks to me like as if there almost was another carving here and they put them on top, but maybe it's just a rendering. I have no understanding, and these guys are just standing on a body. But again, you know, the difference between the uplifting art and architecture of the Aria and then the depictions that come from the lesser. But they had to do that. You know, they had to put this in here. I mean, you can even look at, you know, like it's just kind of, you know, it's falling apart already, even though this is much newer than this stuff here. The Pretenders, again, you know, they were not incapable. They were certainly, I mean, they had the, you know, they came from the families and they had the education. You know, they had the wherewithal to continue the greatness, but they didn't. And here's, like, you know, the genealogies of the ancient emperors of Tartary. And it's just, as soon as you start seeing this stuff, this is where so much of the lying came in, even in Europe and in China, the king's lists, you know. It's, you know, great, they make great novels. Oh yeah, this is construction of the Hoover Dam. I mean, look at this thing, they're building the Hoover Dam, but look at this little construction that's already going into the mountain. All right, what is, you know, looks like they're building this, and there's already this in here, and this, even from the earliest photos, they have this. Matter of fact, this looks a little covered up. I don't know if I have the original. I mean, like even here, it looks like they've destroyed something. See, it's like a little window there. And here's, you know, again, you see a machine that is good for putting in stuff on an already dug tunnel, but you don't see it. This is not a boring machine. This is a facing machine. Typical, you know, typical thing you see, like what's supposed to be fine, and you see all the debris and whatever. I mean, you see, you're seeing monkeys. Oh yeah, what do I call this one? Oh yeah, Christianity comes to Australia. And then more tech. Okay. So I guess I'm about done. I wanted to just, I realized I'd been away a month. I had gotten new subscribers. I was actually feeling bad. You know, it's just like, okay, they're here to, you know, they're here because they think you have something to say, and I usually do. And just about that time, I go into basically, you know, kind of clearly it's an initiatory. You know, it's like a form of personal initiation, where restructuring is occurring. So anyway, I guess that's going to be it for this show. Mystic Brew, I guess I'm going to call it the Arians. Who knows? Or the Aria. The Aria. I think that should probably be it. I actually use fairly. I try to be informative but boring in my titles. And one of I purposely underplay. I mean, I've sometimes had someone say, "Oh man, that would be a hot title." I'm not looking for thrill seekers on my channel. I'm looking for people who want information and, you know, some kind of sobriety. I'm not looking for I'm not somebody's endorphin fix. So I purposely pick less than exciting titles. I do that on purpose. I'm trying to almost be boring, but not dead. And it just worked out well. I mean, I'm always glad for the subscribers because it's always a slow, steady growth. And to me, that means that somebody has maybe tuned in to what I'm doing, and is not for the endorphin fix. And the fact that as people came, they didn't leave as quickly when I didn't put up a video tells me that these are thoughtful subscribers, and that's exactly what I aim for. I want a certain type of subscriber. Not the numbers are really unimportant to me. Matter of fact, if I had as many subscribers as Martin Liedtke, you'd probably scare the crap out of me. You know, I mean, not really scared, but it would. I would feel pressure from that. You know, us mystics, you know, if knowing that you have 3,000 people waiting, 30,000 people waiting for you to release your next video, yikes. But Martin's up to it. He's the man. Okay, everybody, take care of yourselves. Be well. I hope I was able to make some sense. And I might have left something out about the aria, but I really don't know. I kind of ran out. My stream expended. So if there's more to come, or maybe some questions will be in the comments, and that'll maybe stimulate a little bit of a conversation, me speaking more particularly on the culture of the aria, or at least, how it's coming to me, and how it really fits what we're observing. Okay, so all take care of yourself. Live in some state of love, and chances are my next couple of videos might be music based. If that's not your thing, just don't watch them. And I will be back with some Tartary series soon enough.